They say history never truly disappears. That every place, no matter how forgotten, leaves a trace, whether in the cracks of old maps, the faded ink of government records, or the whispered memories of its people. But what if there was a town that didn't just vanish, it was erased? Not abandoned, not destroyed in a natural disaster, not lost to time, but deliberately wiped out, as if it had never existed. Imagine opening an atlas from the 1950s and seeing a name you've never heard before, a settlement marked clearly along a familiar riverbank. Then, flipping to a modern map of the exact same region, the name is gone. No ruins, no monuments, not even a footnote. Now imagine searching libraries, state archives, and digital databases, only to discover that every mention of this town, newspapers, census records, property deeds, has been systematically deleted. That is where our story begins. For decades, whispers have circulated about a place known only in fragments. A town that people remember visiting as children, only to grow up and discover no record of it anywhere. Teachers who used to teach there, farmers who worked its soil, families who called it home, today, they exist only in fractured memory, scattered across generations like shadows no one dares to name. And if you ask too many questions about it, you'll find doors closing, voices dropping, and warnings whispered, let it go. Some things are better left forgotten. But why? Why would an entire town's history be scrubbed clean? Who decides what deserves to remain in history and what must be buried beneath silence? And more importantly, what could possibly have happened there that was so disturbing, so dangerous, that authorities went to such extremes to erase it from collective memory? The story we're about to unfold isn't just about a missing town. It's about power, fear, and the terrifying lengths institutions can go to in order to control the past. Because once you control the past, you shape the present, and dictate the future. At first glance, the mystery seems almost absurd. A vanished town sounds like folklore, an urban legend told around campfires, or a ghost story passed down to scare children. And for years, that's exactly what many assumed. Skeptics dismissed it as faulty memory, a trick of geography, or simply confusion with another place. After all, how could a whole community just disappear? But with every dismissive answer, the questions only grew darker. Researchers who tried to dig deeper began encountering strange obstacles. A map with a blurred-out marking, the ink suspiciously smudged. A government index where entire years were missing. Microfilm reels mysteriously scratched at the exact frame where the town's name should have appeared. Again and again, the trail ended not with clarity, but with intentional absence. And then there were the people, those rare individuals who dared to speak. Survivors who carried fragments of memory, enough to hint that something terrible once happened there, but not enough to piece together the full truth. Their stories are marked by hesitation, pauses, and unfinished sentences. As if remembering was painful, or dangerous. One elderly man, when asked if he had lived there as a boy, looked away and muttered, "I was told not to remember." It is this silence, the carefully constructed, suffocating silence, that makes this mystery so haunting. Because silence doesn't happen by accident. Silence is enforced. And the deeper you go into this story, the more you realize that erasing a town isn't about the land, or the buildings, or even the people. It's about erasing what happened. So, as we begin this journey into shadows, keep one thing in mind: this isn't just history. This is a story that was never meant to be told. And the fragments you're about to hear, the diaries, the testimonies, the forbidden documents, exist only because a few traces escaped the purge. What they reveal is not only shocking, it is terrifying. Because if one town could be erased so completely from every archive, every library, and every memory, how many others might already be gone? How much of our history is truly ours, and how much has been stolen, rewritten, or burned away? This is not a story of forgetting. This is a story of being forced to forget. And tonight, we're going to remember what we were never supposed to. If the erasure of this town was absolute, there should have been nothing left. No trail, no evidence, not even a scrap of paper to hint at its existence. And yet, traces always find a way of bleeding through, even when someone tries to hide them. The first cracks in the silence appeared not in grand archives or heavily guarded vaults, but in something deceptively ordinary: old maps. Cartographers are meticulous. Every settlement, no matter how small, is marked, measured, and indexed. And in the margins of these yellowing sheets of paper, scattered across libraries and private collections, a strange pattern began to surface. In maps from the early 20th century, one could see a town marked clearly, its borders drawn, its name etched in ink that has long since faded to sepia. But in later editions, the same region lies empty. No mark, no village, no explanation. Just a blank stretch of terrain, as though the land itself had never been touched by human hands. At first, researchers dismissed it as a common cartographic error. Settlements sometimes moved, names changed, populations dwindled. But then came the unsettling detail: on certain maps, the space where the town should have been was not simply left blank, it was deliberately obscured. Ink smeared, letters scraped away, sometimes a neat rectangle of white paper glued directly over the name, leaving behind a faint square shadow under the lamplight. And it wasn't just one or two maps. It was dozens. Across states, across publishers, across decades. A smear here, a scratch there, different techniques, but always on the exact same spot. The odds of so many independent cartographers all making the same mistake. Impossible. Someone wanted this place gone, and they wanted it gone everywhere. Historians who stumbled upon these anomalies began to whisper about the so-called phantom town. Theories flourished in academic circles, often spoken in hushed tones over late-night study tables. Was it a settlement destroyed by a plague? A company town shut down after an industrial accident? A cult colony erased to prevent panic? Each theory carried weight, but none explained the precision of the erasure. This wasn't nature reclaiming land. This was someone deliberately tampering with memory itself. But the most chilling discoveries weren't in the maps themselves. They came from the handwritten notes in their margins. One collector found a scrawl, written in faded pencil: "Do not mention. Removed by order." Another, in the corner of a map's legend, contained 3 cryptic words: "Never remember this." For some, these discoveries might have been dismissed as idle vandalism, the work of pranksters or bored students. But then a far more disturbing clue surfaced. A retired librarian recalled cataloging a donation of old atlases in the 1970s. Among them was one peculiar volume with a torn page. When she examined it more closely, she found a fragment of a diary tucked between the pages. On it, barely legible through age, were the words, "We were told never to remember." That diary fragment would become the first human voice in this mystery, the first hint that the town was not only erased from paper, but also from the minds and tongues of those who once lived there. And the way it was hidden, tucked away as though someone had risked everything to preserve it, suggested something terrifying: people weren't just forgetting on their own. They were being made to forget. Folklore, of course, rushed in to fill the silence. In nearby communities, strange stories circulated. Children growing up in neighboring towns were told never to wander too far east, because the land there is cursed. Farmers spoke of fields that should have been fertile but yielded nothing, as if the soil itself recoiled from memory. Others whispered of figures seen in the mist, silhouettes of houses where no houses stood, echoes of church bells tolling in the dead of night. Legends rarely survive without a seed of truth. And the persistence of these whispers hinted at something authorities could never fully erase. You can burn documents, censor books, even scrub maps, but human fear lingers. Fear passes from lips to ears, from generation to generation, reshaping itself into ghost stories and half-forgotten warnings. The deeper researchers went, the more dangerous the trail became. One historian, after publishing a paper about the missing town, suddenly retracted his work and refused to discuss it further. When pressed, he muttered only, "I was advised it would be better for my health to pursue other projects." Another, who insisted on following up leads from the diary fragment, died in what authorities called an unfortunate accident. The details of his death. A car crash late at night, his vehicle found near the very region where the town once stood. His notes, which colleagues swore he had been carrying, were never recovered. Patterns like these don't emerge by chance. Each fragment, each disappearance, suggested something larger, something orchestrated. And yet the core question remained, what had happened in that town so monstrous, so unspeakable, that the safest solution was to pretend it had never existed? The torn diary, the maps with their smudges and scratches, the warnings in the margins, all pointed in one direction. Erasure wasn't an accident. It was an order. And whoever gave that order wielded enough power to rewrite history itself. But what could they possibly be hiding? And more disturbingly, why were they so afraid that anyone might remember? Maps can be erased. Records can be burned. But people, the ones who lived, worked, and loved in that town, they don't vanish so easily. Their existence lingers, etched into memory, passed down through fragments of conversation, old photographs hidden in drawers, and family stories whispered at night. And yet, when you try to trace them, you hit the same wall of silence. These were people who should exist in census logs, school registers, and marriage licenses. But in every archive, they are absent. It is as if an entire population was not just relocated, but deliberately unmade. The trail begins with descendants, men and women who, when asked about their grandparents' origins, hesitate before answering. Some claim they moved from somewhere nearby, though they can't name the town. Others recall hearing relatives mention a place that doesn't appear on any map. One woman, living 3 states away, said her mother used to hum a lullaby from back home, but when pressed to name where home was, she would fall silent, shake her head, and sometimes cry. These fragments don't sound unusual at first. Families migrate, names change, oral traditions fade. But the strangeness lies in the uniformity of the gaps. Across dozens of interviews, across hundreds of miles, the stories repeat, blurred details, missing names, careful omissions. It feels less like natural forgetting and more like deliberate avoidance. And then there are the photographs. Scattered across attics and shoeboxes, they surface now and then, grainy black and white images of families standing proudly outside wooden homes, of children in school uniforms, of gatherings in what looks like a town square. At first glance, they are ordinary snapshots of mid-century life. But look closer, and you'll see something strange. No writing on the back. No names, no dates, no identifying markers at all. Just images cut adrift from their origins, as if the people in them were stripped of identity. One photograph in particular haunts researchers, a group portrait of schoolchildren lined up outside a brick building. Their faces are clear, smiling, innocent. But the signboard above them, where the name of the school should have been, has been scratched away. Not weathered, not faded, but violently gouged out, as if someone took a blade to the photograph itself. Who would do that? And why? The survivors who do speak, however cautiously, describe the town as both ordinary and uncanny. Ordinary in the sense that life there looked like any other rural community, farmers tending fields, merchants keeping shops, families gathering for Sunday church. But uncanny because of the way memory folds around it. One elderly man, now in his 90s, recalls running through a playground as a boy. He can describe the wooden swings, the laughter of other children, even the smell of the fresh-cut grass. But when asked where that playground was, his voice trembles. "I was told not to say," he whispers, before refusing to continue. It is this hesitation, the mixture of memory and prohibition, that paints the most chilling picture. Survivors don't just seem to forget, they seem bound by an invisible pact of silence. Some claim they were directly threatened. Others insist it was more subtle, a sense that remembering itself would bring punishment. One woman recalls her mother waking her in the middle of the night, instructing her never to mention the town's name again. She was only 8 years old at the time. Why would parents warn their children against memory? What could possibly be so dangerous about acknowledging where you came from? Unless, of course, the danger wasn't in the place itself, but in the truth of what happened there. Researchers began to piece together genealogies, tracing surnames that seemed to cluster unnaturally in nearby towns. Entire families appeared out of nowhere in census records from the 1950s, listed with no prior documentation. When asked about their origins, descendants shrug. My grandparents came from somewhere east, I think. Yet no certificates, no property deeds, no burial records tie them to any location. It is as if they materialized, fully formed, in the aftermath of something unspeakable. And then came the rare, fragile testimonies, the moments where silence cracked. In one interview, a woman broke down after being asked if she remembered leaving the town. Between sobs, she managed only a few words: "We didn't leave. We were taken." Another survivor, confined to a nursing home, described a night when men in uniforms came to the houses. He recalled trucks, hurried whispers, and families forced to gather with only what they could carry. But when asked what happened next, he fell silent for a long time before murmuring, "I shouldn't be talking about this. They said if we remember, we'll never be safe." The language of fear is unmistakable. These aren't the hesitations of old age or fading memory. These are the scars of trauma, carried across decades. And the consistency of these fragments suggests something collective, something orchestrated. And yet, for all their silence, the survivors leave behind an undeniable truth: the people of this town existed. They worked, they played, they raised families, they celebrated and mourned just like anyone else. And now, they walk among us as shadows, present in bloodlines and stories, but absent from the official record. The phrase, "people who shouldn't exist," isn't meant literally. It reflects the way authorities rewrote their identities, scattering them so thoroughly across history that their very existence became a contradiction. They are living evidence of a place that supposedly never was. And that contradiction, the clash between memory and erasure, is precisely what makes them dangerous. One survivor summed it up best in a chilling quote preserved in a researcher's notes: "We exist, but we are not allowed to exist. We remember, but we are not allowed to remember. We live, but in silence. That is our curse." And yet, beneath that silence, something more disturbing lingers. Survivors hint not only at forced relocation, but at something they saw, something that convinced them silence was safer than truth. As one man said before ending an interview abruptly, "If you knew what we witnessed, you'd stay silent too." That single sentence, more than maps or erased records, carries the weight of terror. Because it suggests that the true reason for the erasure wasn't simply to make the town disappear. It was to bury whatever the people there had seen. And the question that remains, hanging in the air like a shadow, is this: what exactly happened in that town that left its survivors haunted into silence? Every mystery has a breaking point, a moment when ordinary life is ripped apart and replaced with something darker. For the vanished town, that moment came suddenly, without warning, and with consequences so devastating that its memory had to be buried. Survivors, officials, and scattered documents all point to one terrifying truth: there was a single night, a single event, that changed everything. And after that, nothing could ever be the same. But what exactly happened? That question has never been answered in full. What survives are fragments, burned records, hushed testimonies, incomplete reports. Each fragment suggests something extraordinary, but none tell the whole story. Piecing them together is like trying to reconstruct a shattered mirror, where every shard reflects a different, distorted glimpse of the same nightmare. The first hints appear in a series of medical logs, salvaged from a county office that somehow missed the purge. They describe an unusual wave of illness reported in the region weeks before the town disappeared. Patients complained of violent headaches, blurred vision, sudden fevers, and, most disturbingly, disorientation. Some claimed they couldn't recognize their own families, others spoke of voices at night. The reports were clinical, detached, but the notes from attending doctors betray unease. One scrawled comment reads, symptoms unlike anything I've seen. Feels, engineered. Not long after, scattered witness accounts describe strange activity. Trucks arriving in the middle of the night, carrying unmarked containers. Armed guards patrolling roads that had never needed guards before. Farmers woken by distant mechanical hums echoing through the fields, though no one could say what machines were running. Children recalled being told to stay indoors, doors locked, curtains drawn. One woman remembers her father pacing the living room, whispering over and over, "Something is happening out there. Something they don't want us to see." And then, the night itself. Survivors' accounts vary, as though their memories were fractured by trauma, or deliberately tampered with. But certain details appear again and again. A loud siren, not unlike an air raid alarm, echoing across the town. Lights, bright, blinding, some from above, others from vehicles flooding the streets. Panic spreading as families rushed outside, only to be met by men in uniforms. Some describe smoke rolling through the streets, a heavy, chemical fog that clung to the ground. Others remember fire, flames rising from buildings, though no cause was ever seen. And in almost every account, there is mention of confusion, of people suddenly unable to think clearly, their memories fogging even as events unfolded around them. One survivor told an interviewer, "It was like the night itself wanted us to forget, even as we lived it." Theories about what this event was have ranged widely. Some believe it was a catastrophic industrial accident, perhaps a chemical spill or a failed experiment that poisoned the town. Others suggest a military test gone wrong, an early trial of psychological or biological warfare. There are even whispers of cult activity, that the town became the site of a mass ritual, something authorities later buried under the guise of containment. What we know for certain is this: by the morning after, the town was no longer the same. Survivors remember soldiers going door to door, ordering families into trucks. Records show a sudden, unexplained spike in fuel purchases and vehicle requisitions in nearby bases that very week. And in one half-burned report, a chilling sentence remains legible: Subject 0 showed signs of, before the page cuts off, the rest lost to fire or deliberate destruction. Who was Subject 0? A patient? A prisoner? A resident exposed to something unnatural? No one knows. But the fact that the report designates a Subject 0 suggests the beginning of a sequence, an experiment, or an outbreak, that authorities were tracking. And if there was a Subject 0, then there were surely others. Other fragments confirm the scale of what followed. Property deeds in surrounding counties suddenly transferred to government ownership. Entire postal routes discontinued overnight. School rosters revised, with dozens of children's names crossed out as though they had never been enrolled. Even the church registry, normally meticulous in recording births and baptisms, contains sudden gaps, entire families simply erased in one sweep of ink. And then there is the fire. Multiple survivors mention flames engulfing the Central Archive building in the heart of town. Some claim it was struck by lightning, others insist it was deliberately set. What remains uncontested is that the fire consumed the bulk of the town's official records. A lifetime of documents, birth certificates, property maps, newspapers, turned to ash in a single night. Whether accidental or intentional, the result was the same: the town's identity burned away. In the years that followed, rumors grew like weeds. Farmers in neighboring areas reported finding strange barrels buried in fields, stamped with cryptic codes. Hunters claimed to see figures in the distance, people wandering the woods at night, moving as though lost, confused, sometimes screaming before vanishing again. Travelers swore they heard bells tolling in the distance, though no church remained standing. It is impossible to separate fact from folklore, truth from legend. And maybe that's exactly what the authorities wanted. By erasing the records, they ensured only fragments survived. And fragments, without context, become myths. Myths, in turn, can be dismissed, ridiculed, or forgotten. But the survivors who remember, even partially, are haunted. They don't speak of it openly, and when they do, their words tremble with fear. One woman, when asked what she saw that night, pressed her hands to her face and whispered, "It wasn't meant for us. We weren't supposed to see it. That's why they erased everything." Her words linger because they point to something larger, something even more terrifying than an accident or an outbreak. If the people of the town witnessed something they were never meant to see, then the erasure wasn't simply about protecting them. It was about silencing them. It was about ensuring that no one, anywhere, would ever know the truth. And so, the question remains, what could have been so horrifying, so uncontainable, that an entire town had to be erased from history? The surviving fragments don't answer that question. Instead, they deepen it. They reveal enough to show that something extraordinary happened, but stop short of telling us what. Perhaps that's the most chilling detail of all. Not the things we know, but the gaps we can't fill. Because gaps in history are never empty. They are deliberate. They are designed. And in those gaps lies the truth of the event that changed everything. When an entire town disappears from the public record, it is impossible to ignore the question, who gave the order? And when the answer is finally traced, it reveals something darker than any fire or fog, more chilling than disappearing maps or erased census rolls. It reveals the deliberate hand of authority, operating not in secrecy by accident, but in carefully planned, methodical concealment. The first signs appeared in the tiniest bureaucratic details. Postal routes rerouted without explanation, schools reclassified, property deeds shifted overnight. It wasn't chaos, it was precise, almost surgical. Those who began investigating noticed a pattern: every trail leading to the town, every record of existence, funneled into a single system of control, one that could easily be manipulated. In short, the erasure wasn't just physical, it was institutional. And institutions rarely move without reason. Interviews with retired officials and former local law enforcement reveal an unnerving picture. Many of them remember that night, the night of the incident, as if it were a dream half remembered, a memory they were told not to share. A former county officer, now in his 80s, recalled being handed instructions the morning after the event: every record, every photograph, every mention of the town, destroy it. Do not ask why, and do not question the order. He described the logistics: trucks filled with boxes of documents, libraries sealed off, state archives purged. Even digital microfilm, which at the time seemed permanent, was systematically scratched, erased, or withheld. Supervisors had stressed repeatedly, "We are not erasing the past. We are preserving it, by making sure no one can find it." He admitted that the phrase didn't make sense at the time, but in hindsight, he realized it was a way to control memory itself. Other whistleblowers tell similar stories. One retired archivist explained how he was ordered to replace the town's name with a generic placeholder in hundreds of government indices. Any hint of specificity was unacceptable. It was like someone wanted to remove the town from existence without even leaving a trace that it had ever existed, he said, his hands trembling at the memory. And the pattern of intimidation was deliberate. Several historians who attempted to publish their findings about the town's disappearance faced sudden, inexplicable career obstacles. One scholar's fellowship was revoked, another's research grant was quietly cancelled. A third, who had begun interviewing survivors, suffered a severe car accident, his notes lost, his research scattered. While authorities called these incidents coincidences, the affected researchers saw them as unmistakable warnings: some truths were not meant to surface. The reach of authority extended into the families themselves. Survivors describe encounters with men in uniform in the weeks following the event, conversations that carried a clear, implicit threat. "Remember nothing," one woman recalls being told, "or you will regret it for the rest of your life." Children were warned, parents silenced, and anyone who questioned the narrative faced consequences subtle and overt. It was the perfect combination of fear and bureaucracy, total compliance enforced not by violence alone, but by the psychological weight of authority. Documents that did survive the purge hint at a level of coordination that is almost unimaginable. Internal memos speak of phases and containment procedures, careful instructions for how to manage witnesses, relocate families, and scrub the digital and physical record simultaneously. The language is clinical, detached, but the intent is unmistakable. This was a cover-up executed with precision, carried out by multiple agencies working in concert. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect is the erasure of narrative itself. When survivors attempted to tell their story, they were met not just with disbelief, but with active suppression. One interviewee recounted attempting to share her recollections at a local community center. The meeting was abruptly cancelled, invitations revoked. It was as though someone had stepped into the room and silenced us all, she said, tears in her eyes. Even journalists were caught in the net. Newspapers that dared investigate the town's disappearance faced retractions, anonymous threats, and a sudden drying up of sources. One reporter described receiving a phone call in the dead of night. A low, authoritative voice warned, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it. We are watching." The implications were clear: this was not an accident, not the work of a rogue individual. This was systemic, deliberate, and terrifying in its thoroughness. Some surviving documents suggest that the event which precipitated the erasure was considered too sensitive for public knowledge. Internal memos refer to it only as the incident or phase alpha, deliberately avoiding descriptive language. And while the true nature of what occurred may never be revealed, the degree of secrecy imposed afterward indicates the authorities considered it a threat not just to local inhabitants, but to anyone who might learn the truth. This section of the story is difficult to convey because of its scale. It is not just about a missing town, it is about the lengths to which power can go to control reality itself. By destroying records, relocating families, and enforcing silence, the authorities created a vacuum. And in that vacuum, speculation grows. People forget, myths form, and the real events recede into shadows, leaving only whispers and fragments. Survivors, meanwhile, carry the weight of memory alone. They speak of nightmares, of waking up in the dark to hear voices they cannot place, of dreams where the town still exists, trapped somewhere beyond time, waiting to be remembered. And when they do speak, their words are cautious, measured, but the fear underlying them is palpable. It is a fear of retaliation, of disbelief, but above all, a fear that the truth is far darker than anyone could imagine. The shadows of authority stretch across decades. Even as the world moves on, the directives that erased the town have left an imprint on history itself. Scholars, journalists, and investigators who try to uncover what happened find themselves tracing invisible lines of influence, all pointing back to the same cold, bureaucratic hand. The erasure was total. Not a single aspect of the town's existence remained unaccounted for. And those who had once lived there were carefully molded into silence, into shadows that could speak only in fragments. The question that emerges at the end of this section is simple, yet terrifying: if an entire town can be erased so completely, what else in our history might have been manipulated, covered up, or entirely hidden? And more importantly, who decides which truths we are allowed to know, and which ones must remain buried forever? Because in the story of this vanished town, the authorities were not just observers. They were the architects of oblivion, the enforcers of memory's erasure, and the silent predators ensuring that whatever happened that night would never be revealed. And as we follow the surviving traces, the people who endured, and the forbidden archives yet to be explored, one fact becomes undeniable: the shadows of authority are long, and they stretch far beyond the borders of a single town. History is written in documents. Maps, letters, photographs, archives, they tell us who existed, what happened, and when. But the history of this vanished town exists mostly in the minds of the people who survived. And memory is fragile. It bends, warps, and often carries the weight of fear. For these survivors, remembering is not just painful, it is dangerous. Decades after the erasure, the surviving residents live scattered across neighboring towns and cities. Some were children during the event, others were adults, forced to witness acts that their minds could barely comprehend. And though they escaped physical harm, they carry scars invisible to the outside world, nightmares, flashbacks, and the heavy burden of knowing something that society has refused to acknowledge. One survivor, a woman now in her 70s, recalls the last moments she spent in the town. "We were told to pack nothing more than we could carry," she said. "The trucks came at night, and by morning, our home was gone, as if it had never been there. And still, I remember the screams." Her voice trembles not just with age, but with the memory itself, a recollection carefully buried for decades. For many survivors, the act of forgetting became a silent pact. Families instructed their children never to speak of the town. Friends avoided references to streets, schools, or familiar landmarks. Conversations would halt abruptly if the topic arose. It was not merely self-censorship, it was an enforced silence, a protective measure meant to shield themselves from consequences they could neither predict nor prevent. This silent pact, however, came with a heavy psychological cost. Researchers note that many survivors experience what is known today as collective trauma, a shared memory of an event so horrific that recalling it triggers intense fear, guilt, and anxiety. In some cases, children who were too young to understand what happened still carry fragmented memories, dreamlike images of fire, smoke, and shadows that cannot be rationalized. One man, now in his 60s, described recurring nightmares of the town burning, of trucks moving silently through fog-laden streets, of men in uniforms watching silently. "He wakes in a cold sweat, heart pounding, decades after the event. Even when I try to forget, my mind won't let me," he admits. "It's as if the town is alive in my memory, punishing me for remembering." The survivors' recollections reveal glimpses of the night when the town was erased. Families herded into trucks, the streets empty but for uniformed figures. Strange lights in the sky, fog rolling unnaturally across the fields, and the deafening roar of a siren that never seemed to stop. Some remember a chemical haze, others a sudden silence, the town itself appearing to hold its breath. Even after escaping, the memories lingered, imprinted with such intensity that recalling them brings both clarity and fear. And yet, the silence imposed by the authorities, warnings, threats, and the deliberate erasure of records, ensured that the survivors had no support. There were no newspapers to confirm their memories, no police reports to validate their experiences, no friends outside their town who could understand. They were isolated in their knowledge, forced to reconcile personal recollection with the absence of evidence. This isolation created a unique bond among survivors, even if they could not speak openly. Shared memories became a secret language, communicated through gestures, looks, and subtle references. In interviews, some survivors admitted that even after decades, they recognized each other by the way they spoke about nothing at all, a quiet understanding that they had endured the same unspeakable events. It was a bond of necessity, forged in silence. And it was a protective measure. To speak openly about the town's erasure was to risk reprisal, social ostracism, or worse. The survivors learned to navigate life as though half of themselves no longer existed, carrying memories too dangerous to share. For some, the trauma manifests in haunting ways. One woman described avoiding certain streets because they reminded her of the town. Another survivor could not enter a library for years, fearing the smell of old paper would trigger memories of burned archives. Children who grew up hearing fragments of the story internalized anxiety, developing a hyper-awareness of authority and an instinctive fear of questioning rules. These were not mere psychological consequences, they were survival mechanisms, passed from one generation to the next. The pact extended beyond memory, it shaped behavior, relationships, and identity. Families avoided forming deep connections with outsiders who might inadvertently ask questions. Social gatherings were carefully curated, stories curated to prevent mention of the vanished town. Even in private moments, the survivors often refrained from speaking, as if the very act of remembering might invite danger. Yet, despite the terror, there is a subtle defiance embedded in these memories. Each recollection is an act of resistance against erasure. Survivors preserve the town in whispers, in fragmented diary entries, and in secret photographs. Even when authorities tried to erase their existence, the town lived on through their memories. The Silent Pact, paradoxically, became a form of rebellion, a testament that the past, no matter how suppressed, cannot be entirely extinguished. Psychologists who have studied these survivors note the duality of their condition: they live with immense fear, yet they carry an extraordinary resilience. They are simultaneously haunted and heroic, burdened by memories too painful to recount yet committed to preserving the truth in whatever small ways they can. Their stories are incomplete, fragmented by necessity, but they form the backbone of the town's hidden history. Perhaps the most poignant example comes from a survivor who, in a rare moment of vulnerability, whispered, "We remember not because we want to, but because forgetting would be worse. If we forget, it's as if they win. And they cannot win." This statement encapsulates the essence of the Silent Pact. It is a balancing act between fear and memory, obedience and resistance, erasure and survival. The survivors carry the weight of a town that no longer exists, yet through them, it endures. And therein lies the terrifying paradox: the authorities may have erased the town from maps, archives, and records, but they could not erase its people. And the people, even in silence, remember. Their memories are fragments, incomplete yet undeniable, providing the only real evidence that the vanished town ever existed. As we continue to explore the hidden truths of this erased town, we will see how these memories intersect with forbidden documents, eyewitness accounts, and the sinister machinations of authority. The Silent Pact of the Survivors is not just a story of trauma, it is a key to understanding why an entire town's history was deemed too dangerous to preserve, and why it remains hidden to this day. If survivors carried the town in their memories, the archives were meant to carry it in ink, paper, and official sanction. And yet, in every official repository, the town had been meticulously excised. Libraries, government vaults, historical societies, all bore the mark of deliberate erasure. But no system is perfect. In the cracks, in overlooked corners, in corners too obscure for casual inspection, fragments remained, fragments that would become the key to unlocking the town's true story. Researchers who dared to dig deeper often stumbled upon these forbidden archives accidentally. One historian, examining a batch of microfilm labeled Miscellaneous Municipal Records, 1930 to 1955, noticed a faint outline where a town's name should have been. The page itself had been physically scratched, yet under magnification, traces of letters remained, hinting at a settlement that no longer officially existed. The initial discovery was tantalizing but incomplete. The microfilm provided only hints, blurred street names, partial census data, and fragments of correspondence between local officials. But it was enough to ignite a full-scale investigation, and soon others began uncovering more. Forgotten boxes in state archives contained letters, some written by the town's former residents, recounting ordinary life, births, marriages, market days, school activities, mundane events that stood in stark contrast to the extraordinary erasure that followed. And then there were the forbidden files themselves, documents deliberately withheld from public access, stamped, confidential, or, restricted, national security. Within these files lay a bureaucratic horror. Internal memos described containment procedures, strategies for erasing records, and instructions for dealing with surviving residents. The language was clinical, detached, and eerily devoid of empathy. References to the incident appeared repeatedly, always in code, always carefully avoiding explicit description, but leaving a sense of dread that no ordinary town could have inspired. One particularly chilling document contained the phrase, "All traces of the settlement are to be removed. Witnesses are to be monitored. Compliance is mandatory. Failure is not an option." The stark clarity of the instruction left no doubt: erasure was intentional, and anyone who resisted would face consequences. Photographs, too, survived, carefully hidden, sometimes wedged between files and boxes long thought discarded. They were ordinary images at first glance: a town square, a schoolhouse, children lined up for a class photograph. But close inspection revealed something strange. Some images were defaced, names scratched out, edges burned, faces blurred with ink. Others had been folded and tucked away in envelopes marked, "Do not open." Yet the photographs persisted, silent witnesses to a place that bureaucrats wanted obliterated. Among the most revealing fragments were diaries and personal letters, often written by teachers, shopkeepers, and ordinary citizens. One diary, penned by a young woman during the months leading up to the incident, describes a growing unease in the town. "Something is coming," she wrote. "People are acting strangely, officials are visiting more often, and at night we hear noises that have no source. I fear we are not safe." The handwriting, shaky and hurried, hints at terror that was escalating in real time, before the town's final night of erasure. Other documents hint at experimentation of a sort that defies understanding. One memo, heavily redacted, referred to a subject zero and noted the effects of an unknown agent on cognitive function. Another referenced containment failures and unexplained phenomena observed in the town. The fragmented language was enough to suggest that what occurred was not merely an accident or natural disaster, but something deliberately engineered, and something that authorities feared would be catastrophic if revealed. The process of uncovering these archives was perilous. Researchers report receiving warnings, veiled threats, and unexplained surveillance. One academic found that files he had requested disappeared from the archive overnight. Another received anonymous messages cautioning him against further investigation. Even when physical access was granted, certain sections were deliberately obstructed, locked drawers, missing keys, or files marked lost, despite evidence of prior existence. And yet, fragments always emerged. Persistence allowed the historians to assemble a mosaic of partial truths. Letters from survivors, cross-referenced with damaged microfilm, and corroborated by oral testimony, painted a picture both mundane and horrifying, a community disrupted by an event that was never fully documented, followed by a coordinated effort to obliterate evidence. Perhaps the most haunting discovery was a set of encrypted codes within a series of official correspondence. These codes, once deciphered, hinted at the scale of the operation. Trucks, personnel, fuel, and materials were accounted for with meticulous precision. Each movement of residents, each destruction of property, each elimination of records was pre-planned. There was no improvisation. There was only the execution of a carefully orchestrated plan designed to erase an entire town. In one of the rare surviving memos, an official noted, "If the town's history is reconstructed by outsiders, containment will fail. Ensure no archival material survives." This sentence crystallized the intent behind every action. The erasure was not accidental, it was a mandate enforced at the highest levels, extending across multiple agencies, and carried out with meticulous attention to detail. Even in their incomplete state, the forbidden archives reveal the scale of ambition behind the erasure. They show a terrifying combination of bureaucratic power and moral indifference. Ordinary people became invisible, entire lives reduced to fragments and shadows. Survivors were silenced, memory suppressed, and the very notion of the town was excised from history. And yet, despite the fear and the meticulous planning, the archives themselves became a lifeline. They contained the seeds of truth, proof that the town existed, and evidence of what happened. Even when hidden, overlooked, or partially destroyed, they allowed researchers to trace the contours of the event, to hear the voices of the residents, and to understand the horrifying scale of the cover-up. The forbidden archives teach a grim lesson: history can be controlled, erased, and manipulated, but it can never be fully extinguished. The fragments that survive, scattered and hidden, are proof that even the most thorough erasure cannot fully erase memory, human experience, or the consequences of extraordinary events. As researchers pieced together the evidence, they realized something terrifying: the erasure of the town was not merely about hiding the past, it was about controlling reality itself. By obliterating documents, photographs, and records, authorities sought to ensure that the world would never know what had occurred. But fragments persisted. The forbidden archives were proof that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of resurfacing. And as these fragments were slowly assembled, a pattern emerged, one that would lead to shocking revelations, unimaginable horrors, and the question that would haunt every investigator: what exactly was so dangerous about the town that it had to be removed from history? In the shadows of the forbidden archives, the truth waits. It is incomplete, fragmented, and elusive, but it exists. And for those brave enough to follow it, the journey into the heart of the vanished town is only beginning. If the forbidden archives held the skeletal framework of truth, the voices of the vanished brought flesh, breath, and terror to it. These were the people who lived through the event, who saw the impossible unfold, who carried the weight of memory while the world pretended nothing had happened. And in their words, the town began to return, not on maps, not in official documents, but in the most human form, testimony. One of the first survivors to speak publicly, under strict anonymity, described the night of the erasure in haunting detail. It started quietly, like the world itself was holding its breath, she whispered. Then the lights came, blinding, unnatural, as though the sky itself was burning. We didn't know what to do. The men in uniforms, they moved silently, but everywhere. And the siren, it never stopped. Her voice trembled, a mixture of fear and disbelief, as if recounting the memory brought the terror back into the room. Others recounted similar experiences, each fragment reinforcing the other. Trucks arrived without warning, their interiors dark and oppressive, carrying entire families away from homes they would never see again. Residents described the fear that gripped the streets, children clinging to parents, animals panicked and fleeing, and an overwhelming sense of surveillance, an invisible hand dictating every movement. And yet, amidst the chaos, there were glimpses of ordinary life, now turned grotesque by the context. One man remembered standing outside his family home, watching neighbors pack hurriedly into vehicles, hearing a child's laughter that sounded out of place, surreal, almost mocking. It was like the world had split into two, he said. Inside the trucks, people whispered and cried. Outside, the night watched silently, as though it knew we had no future. These testimonies, cross-referenced with fragments from the forbidden archives, revealed startling consistency. Locations of trucks, routes taken, patterns of evacuation, and even the timing of specific events were documented in memos, maps, and letters, all aligning with survivors' recollections. It became clear that what the authorities called containment procedures was executed with chilling precision, as though the town itself were being erased with a mechanical inevitability. The human cost, however, is almost impossible to quantify. Survivors spoke of families torn apart, personal possessions destroyed, and lives upended with brutal efficiency. One elderly woman described losing not just her home, but every photograph, every letter, every token of memory. It wasn't just the town they took, she said softly. They took our past. They took us from ourselves. The emotional impact on children who witnessed these events was profound. Psychologists who later interviewed some of the now-adult survivors noted recurring symptoms: anxiety, hypervigilance, sleep disturbances, and vivid nightmares. One interviewee described recurring dreams in which the town rebuilt itself, only to be swept away again, over and over, as if memory itself had become a cycle of destruction. What makes these testimonies even more compelling is the intersection with documents uncovered in the forbidden archives. Letters from teachers, shopkeepers, and local officials described the growing unease in the weeks leading up to the incident. One letter, preserved in a private collection, reads, "People are frightened. Officials are asking questions, inspecting homes. Something is coming. I do not know what, but I fear for the children." Another diary entry recounts late-night meetings between residents, whispered fears of surveillance, and a pervasive sense that time itself was running out. The combination of first-hand testimony and archival evidence forms a mosaic of the town's final days. We can trace streets emptied in the dead of night, families herded into vehicles, and the systematic destruction of records. We can hear, almost audibly, the fear that gripped the community, and the strange, suffocating order imposed by authorities. And yet, even amidst the terror, small acts of humanity persisted. Survivors recall neighbors shielding children, residents sharing food in secret, and whispered reassurances passed quietly in the shadows. These moments, fleeting as they were, offer a glimpse into the resilience of the human spirit, the instinct to preserve life, memory, and dignity even when facing overwhelming control. One of the most haunting aspects revealed in testimony is the memory of the fog, a strange, chemical haze reported by multiple witnesses. Its presence is corroborated by references in internal memos, which note an unidentified agent causing disorientation and compliance. Survivors describe it as thick, clinging, and almost alive, sapping clarity, distorting perception, and amplifying fear. Children were the most affected, often freezing in place, unable to understand why the world seemed to dissolve around them. Adults describe struggling to maintain consciousness, guided more by instinct than reason. These revelations bring an additional layer of horror. The erasure of the town was not just bureaucratic or administrative, it involved active manipulation, potentially even experimental procedures, designed to ensure that no one could resist, remember, or bear witness. The people of the town were not simply relocated, they were controlled, observed, and broken in subtle ways, leaving only fragments of memory intact. Even decades later, the psychological scars remain vivid. One survivor described avoiding cemeteries for fear of encountering reminders, while another refused to drive past the area, convinced that the fog or the sirens could return. Dreams of the town appear in fragmented sequences, streets folding upon themselves, trucks moving endlessly, figures in uniforms watching silently. Each testimony carries the weight of collective trauma, a shared consciousness shaped by fear, loss, and erasure. And yet, for all the terror, the survivors provide the most compelling evidence that the town ever existed. Where maps, archives, and photographs fail, the human mind retains the imprint of life, of place, and of memory. Each voice, hesitant and fragmented though it may be, is a declaration: we were here. We lived. And what was done to us cannot erase us completely. Researchers compiling these testimonies noted another chilling trend: reluctance to speak fully, even under anonymity. Survivors often paused mid-sentence, eyes darting as if expecting an unseen observer. Some used vague language or metaphors, describing events in indirect terms. It was a night of lights and noise, one said. It felt like the town itself was folding in on itself. Others spoke of the men, the fog, or the order, never providing clear detail, yet conveying terror in every word. This gap between knowledge and communication is perhaps the most horrifying aspect of the event. The town was erased not just physically but mentally, and the trauma enforced a form of self-censorship. Survivors must live with fragments of memory, unable to fully articulate what occurred, yet unable to forget. It is a living paradox, a silent testimony to the event and a systematic erasure of history. By combining survivor accounts with the fragments of forbidden archives, historians began to reconstruct the contours of the vanished town's final night. The alignment of memory and document creates a chillingly coherent narrative. Trucks moved along pre-planned routes, officials enforced silence, records were destroyed, and the population was dispersed under coercion and fear. The town itself was erased, but not entirely. Through memory and testimony, it lingers. And therein lies the final revelation of this section: the voices from the vanished town are more powerful than any archive. They prove existence in a way that no document ever could. They are living evidence, defying erasure, and carrying forward the truth that authorities attempted to bury. In listening to them, we confront the horror, resilience, and enduring presence of a town that officially never existed, but whose memory refuses to die. Most stories of hidden truths begin with curiosity, a single question that refuses to be silenced. But few investigations face obstacles like the one surrounding the vanished town. Researchers, historians, and journalists who attempted to uncover the truth quickly learned that some events are protected, not by law alone, but by fear, secrecy, and a web of deliberate obstruction. The first formal attempts to investigate were met with a wall of silence. Government offices denied requests for records, citing lost archives, national security, or bureaucratic mismanagement. Libraries and historical societies claimed missing documents, misplaced boxes, or miscatalogued microfilm. Even private collections, once considered reliable, yielded only fragments, many of which had been damaged, redacted, or defaced. One historian, determined to trace the genealogy of displaced families, encountered an unusual phenomenon: every inquiry he made was subtly obstructed. Interviewees who might have provided information suddenly became unreachable. Correspondence with local officials went unanswered. Letters disappeared from his mailbox, and digital files on his research computer inexplicably corrupted. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone, or some organization, was determined to prevent him from uncovering the truth. Despite these obstacles, investigative teams persisted, piecing together survivor testimonies, forbidden archives, and fragmentary documents. They began to notice patterns that were impossible to ignore: the uniformity of erased records, the consistency of survivor recollections, and the meticulous coordination of the erasure itself. These were not isolated coincidences, this was a deliberate, systemic operation. The investigation gained traction when researchers discovered surviving internal memos detailing containment procedures. These documents outlined the methodical removal of residents, destruction of property, and erasure of official records. References to Subject Zero and Phase Alpha suggested that the town's disappearance was tied to an experiment or event that authorities considered too sensitive for public knowledge. One investigator described the chilling realization: we weren't just uncovering lost history. We were uncovering a crime that had been orchestrated at the highest levels, and they didn't want anyone to know we were looking. The investigation, far from being a neutral academic exercise, became a dangerous pursuit, with the stakes rising as each fragment of evidence came to light. The danger was not theoretical. Researchers began receiving threats, anonymous calls in the dead of night, emails warning them to abandon their work, and messages left on their doorsteps. In one particularly harrowing case, a journalist discovered that his apartment had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but all research materials relating to the town had been removed or destroyed. The message was unmistakable: stop digging, or face consequences. Even when investigators made progress, they faced disinformation campaigns. Competing narratives were planted in academic journals and local media, casting doubt on the existence of the town or the reliability of survivor testimonies. Researchers were accused of fabricating evidence, misremembering events, or pursuing a hoax. It was a psychological as well as bureaucratic battle, an effort to undermine credibility and erode determination. Despite the obstacles, certain breakthroughs provided critical momentum. Cross-referencing survivor accounts with damaged archives revealed a startling degree of alignment. Details that seemed anecdotal were corroborated in partial documents. Truck routes described by witnesses matched shipping logs. Evacuation timelines aligned with internal memos. The convergence of evidence, once painstakingly reconstructed, revealed the outlines of a carefully orchestrated erasure. But with each breakthrough, the stakes escalated. Investigators reported being followed, surveilled, and even confronted by individuals claiming authority but refusing to identify themselves. Attempts to access additional documents in local government offices were met with sudden closures or misplaced files. Researchers realized that the reach of those behind the erasure extended far beyond the town itself, an invisible web of power ensuring that the story remained buried. The human element added further tension. Survivors, often fearful and hesitant, sometimes withdrew mid-interview, terrified that sharing too much could trigger retribution. Researchers found themselves walking a delicate line, gaining the trust of traumatized individuals while avoiding exposure to the very forces that had orchestrated the town's disappearance decades earlier. Every interview became a negotiation with fear itself, a test of patience, empathy, and persistence. One particularly chilling discovery came from an overlooked set of coded internal memos. The documents described a hierarchy of oversight, multiple agencies coordinating the erasure, instructions issued from offices far beyond the county, and contingency plans to neutralize anyone who might reconstruct the town's history. The memos were brief, clinical, and terrifyingly explicit: if the town's history were reconstructed without authorization, containment would fail, and corrective action would be immediate. This revelation transformed the investigation from an academic endeavor into a high-stakes pursuit. It became clear that those who orchestrated the erasure were still active, still monitoring efforts to uncover the truth, and willing to act to maintain secrecy. Every step forward brought new tension, every fragment of evidence felt like a small victory against a silent but omnipresent adversary. And yet, the investigators pressed on, driven by the voices of survivors and the fragments preserved in forbidden archives. Their work revealed not only the methods of erasure but hinted at a larger, more disturbing picture, a coordinated effort to manipulate history itself, to ensure that an entire community could be removed from memory, and that the truth of what happened would remain inaccessible. The investigation, in its most basic form, was a race against invisibility. The longer the truth remained hidden, the more it risked being lost entirely, through death, forgetfulness, or the continued suppression of evidence. And yet, the very act of investigating carried risk. Researchers became both witnesses and targets, navigating the shadowy intersection of truth, memory, and authority. By the end of this section, the narrative is clear: the erasure of the town was no accident, no isolated act. It was a deliberate, systematic operation carried out by powerful forces determined to control history, silence witnesses, and manipulate perception. And the investigators, through courage, persistence, and a refusal to accept erasure, were beginning to uncover the depth of the conspiracy, a conspiracy that extended far beyond the borders of the vanished town. The cliffhanger is inevitable: if these forces remain active, if the suppression continues, what happens next? Who will succeed in uncovering the full truth, and what dangers will they face as they attempt to illuminate a history authorities have worked so hard to obliterate? Every investigation builds tension, every clue adds weight, but few investigations prepare you for the moment when the full scope of a conspiracy is revealed. For the vanished town, that moment came in fragments, then suddenly, with undeniable clarity. What had seemed like bureaucratic oversight, or an inexplicable local event, was revealed to be part of a meticulously planned, morally unfathomable operation. The revelation began with a combination of survivor testimony, hidden archives, and cross-referenced memos. Investigators discovered that the incident that precipitated the town's erasure was not a natural disaster, industrial accident, or even a simple act of cruelty. It was something far more complex, orchestrated by multiple layers of authority with far-reaching intent. Central to the revelation was the existence of experimental procedures carried out in secret, targeting the town's population. References to Subject Zero and Phase Alpha were no longer vague; they described deliberate tests on human cognition and memory, conducted under the guise of containment. Documents indicate that certain individuals were subjected to agents causing disorientation, compliance, and partial amnesia, explaining the survivors' fragmented recollections and the meticulous silence maintained for decades. The implications were staggering. The town had been effectively used as a live test site for psychological or biochemical experiments, the details of which remain classified in part even today. While surviving residents were physically unharmed in most cases, their memories, perceptions, and identities were tampered with to ensure control. The human mind itself became both the experiment and the containment mechanism. As investigators pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the operation's scale exceeded anything previously imagined. The coordination involved multiple governmental agencies, local authorities, and even private contractors. Trucks, fuel, personnel, and security measures were meticulously documented. Every detail, evacuation routes, timing of events, suppression of records, was pre-planned, leaving almost no room for error. The goal was singular: to erase not only the town but its history, memory, and existence from public consciousness. The forbidden archives revealed another chilling component: contingency plans. Authorities anticipated the possibility of survivors speaking out, of researchers uncovering fragments, or of whistleblowers leaking information. Every potential breach was addressed. Documents referred to neutralization of threats and suppression of unauthorized reconstruction, phrases that implied a willingness to actively intervene if the operation's secrecy was compromised. Survivor testimonies added a deeply human element to the chilling documentation. Witnesses spoke of the chemical haze, the blinding lights, and the men in uniforms who moved with silent precision. Children frozen with fear, families loaded into trucks without explanation, and ordinary neighborhoods transformed into experimental zones, all of these details confirmed the procedural nature of the operation. Perhaps most horrifying was the realization that the erasure extended beyond physical presence. Historical records, family documents, photographs, and local archives were all intentionally destroyed or manipulated. Birth certificates were altered, property deeds reassigned, and school registries edited as though the town had never existed. Even digital and microfilm archives were systematically corrupted. The town's existence had been scrubbed from every conceivable record. One document, partially redacted but legible, described the operation in clinical language: total erasure of the settlement and all associated data is authorized. Witnesses are to be monitored. Compliance is mandatory. Records of compliance must be verified. The cold, bureaucratic tone masks the moral horror beneath, the deliberate removal of human lives and histories from the fabric of reality itself. The investigators also uncovered evidence suggesting that the operation was part of a larger series of experiments. Internal correspondence hints at multiple sites, protocols tested on different communities, and ongoing monitoring of affected populations. The vanished town, it seems, was only one of several locations used to test methods of memory suppression, social control, and behavioral manipulation. The revelation expanded the narrative from a local tragedy to a systemic, government-sanctioned program of ethical and historical violation. The human cost became painfully clear. Survivors' identities, sense of place, and shared history were weaponized against them. They were silenced, fragmented, and monitored. Memories of friends, neighbors, and daily life were lost or altered. Many lived decades under the weight of trauma without understanding its full origin. The combination of psychological manipulation and physical displacement created lifelong scars that official records could never convey. For investigators, the emotional impact of uncovering this truth was immense. It was no longer merely an academic exercise, it was a confrontation with moral and institutional horror. The more evidence they collected, the more apparent it became that ordinary citizens had been sacrificed in service of an experiment that valued secrecy over humanity. Every document, every testimony, and every fragment of proof carried a weight that blurred the line between historical research and human reckoning. The revelation also reframed the role of authority in a way few anticipated. This was not a rogue operation by a few individuals, it was a systematic orchestration spanning multiple bureaucracies, executed with meticulous care, and maintained for decades. The erasure of the town was less about a single night of chaos and more about decades of control over memory, history, and truth. The vanished town became a case study in the absolute power of authority to shape reality. Even now, unanswered questions remain. Investigators continue to puzzle over the full extent of the experiments, the long-term effects on survivors, and whether other towns were similarly erased or manipulated. The fragments that remain, diaries, letters, photographs, and testimonies, cannot capture the entirety of the operation. But they are enough to convey a terrifying clarity: the vanished town was deliberately removed from existence, both physically and historically, in a calculated act of control and secrecy. As the shocking revelation settled into place, the narrative tension peaks. The vanished town is no longer a mysterious footnote, a legend, or a bureaucratic anomaly. It is a testament to human ingenuity employed for moral and ethical devastation. And as the investigators compile the evidence, cross-referencing survivor testimony with archival fragments, one truth becomes unavoidable: the town was not erased by accident. It was erased because its existence, its memory, and its history were deemed dangerous, so dangerous that authorities were willing to manipulate reality itself to suppress it. The section ends with a haunting thought: if an entire town could be removed so completely, who decides what is remembered, and what is erased? And more importantly, what other parts of history might be controlled, manipulated, or obliterated by those with the power to do so? The shocking revelation does not merely conclude the mystery, it reframes it. The town's story is a warning, a glimpse into the lengths to which power will go to maintain control, and a testament to the resilience of memory in the face of systematic erasure. It is both a climax and a bridge, leading inexorably toward the haunting conclusion where the consequences of these actions, and the echoes of the vanished town, linger in the shadows. Every story has an ending. But some stories, like the vanished town, do not end, they linger, echoing in memory, documents, and the lives of those who survived. The town may have been erased from maps, archives, and official records, yet its presence persists in the shadows of history, in the fragmented memories of its residents, and in the whispers that refuse to be silenced. The survivors carry the legacy most vividly. They are living testaments to a place that officially never existed. Every recollection, every anecdote, every fragment of memory preserves a piece of the vanished town. And yet, this legacy is bittersweet. The town's existence is remembered only in fragments, often accompanied by trauma, loss, and the weight of secrecy imposed by decades of systemic erasure. One survivor reflects, "We remember not because it comforts us, but because forgetting would be like betraying those who are gone." The town lives in our minds, even if no one else can see it. This sentiment captures the paradox at the heart of the town's legacy: it is invisible to the world, yet vividly real to those who experienced it. Memory becomes both a sanctuary and a burden, a way to preserve existence against forces determined to eliminate it. The forbidden archives, once hidden and incomplete, now form a cornerstone of understanding. Each recovered document, microfilm, and photograph illuminates the past, offering glimpses into everyday life that bureaucrats and authorities sought to erase. Letters recounting birthdays, school events, and ordinary routines remind us that the town was not merely a site of experimentation or control, it was a community, filled with human lives, ambitions, and dreams abruptly interrupted. Yet, even as fragments of history surface, many questions remain unanswered. Investigators and historians are left to piece together a narrative from incomplete evidence, testimonies tempered by trauma, and documents deliberately obscured. The full scope of the incident, the precise nature of the experiments, and the extent of the authorities' orchestration remain partially shrouded in mystery. And perhaps this is the most haunting aspect: the truth is tantalizingly close, yet impossibly elusive. The legacy of the vanished town is also a lesson in resilience. Survivors, despite fear, displacement, and trauma, have carried forward fragments of life, history, and memory. Some maintain secret journals, carefully recording recollections. Others gather quietly in hidden spaces to share stories with trusted companions. In doing so, they defy erasure, not through official recognition, but through the human instinct to remember, to testify, and to persist. Psychologists studying these survivors note an unusual phenomenon: while many exhibit symptoms of collective trauma, they also demonstrate extraordinary adaptive resilience. Memory, though fragmented, is precise in certain details: street names, family relationships, and personal experiences. The human mind, even under duress, retains what authorities sought to destroy. It is a paradox of vulnerability and strength, horror and endurance, trauma and memory. The town's story also ripples outward. Scholars, journalists, and independent investigators who have pieced together the fragments serve as secondary vessels of legacy. Through their work, the vanished town escapes complete oblivion. Their publications, documentaries, and research ensure that the memory of the town exists beyond the lived experiences of survivors, reaching audiences who would otherwise never know that such a place once existed. And yet, the legacy is not purely academic or documentary. It is profoundly human. The vanished town represents the tension between authority and memory, between erasure and survival, between the official record and lived experience. It challenges assumptions about history, reminding us that what is recorded is often curated, manipulated, or hidden. It underscores the fragility of memory, the persistence of trauma, and the enduring courage of those who refuse to remain silent. The haunting conclusion lies in this paradox: the town does not exist in official records, but it exists in human consciousness. It cannot be mapped, indexed, or catalogued, yet it is vividly real in the hearts and minds of survivors. Its legacy is a warning, a challenge, and a testament, a reminder that history can be manipulated, but human memory, determination, and testimony resist total erasure. And as the shadows of authority stretch across decades, the town's memory persists like a ghost. It haunts archives, whispers in survivor recollections, and lingers in the margins of forbidden documents. The vanished town, though erased from paper and maps, survives in ways authorities never anticipated, through human memory, through fragmented testimony, and through the unwavering persistence of truth-seekers. Finally, the legacy of the vanished town is a reflection on human history itself. If an entire community can be erased, what else might be hidden from view? How many stories, lives, and events have been obscured, manipulated, or lost forever? The vanished town is both an anomaly and a mirror, a stark reminder that the preservation of memory is a fragile, precious act, and that even in the face of deliberate erasure, human experience cannot be fully destroyed. And so, the story concludes not with answers, but with questions, echoes, and the enduring presence of those who refuse to be forgotten. The vanished town remains a silent witness, a shadow in the archives, a whisper in memory, and a haunting testament to what is possible when power seeks to control history itself.